Officials announced they have positively identified 55 of the 67 victims from Wednesday night's midair collision between an American Airlines passenger flight and a military Black Hawk helicopter. There are still many answers over how this could happen. Authorities are advocating change regarding military aircraft and commercial airspace. Well, here to talk about the latest information of what we know is former air traffic controller and CEO of Summers Capital, Rich Summers, who is also the host of the Rich Summers Report. Thank you so much for joining us.
Steph, thank you for having me this morning.
So we have a lot to get to, but first I want to give viewers some perspective. You were an air traffic controller for 11 years. What was that training like?
The training is very rigorous. So you go out to Oklahoma City typically for the initial training. It's about 3 to 4 months. Once you get through Oklahoma City, then you will be placed into a facility. You either go to a radar facility, which will be in a center or an approach facility, which is all radar. And you're talking to the aircraft and the pilots working radar scopes, or you go to a tower. And so depending on your skill level and what your experience is, you will go to one of the two. Typically, if you're higher skill level, you will go to the radar facilities, and then if you're lower skill level, you will go to the tower facilities, generally speaking. And then based on that, you might move around a little bit. So you might start a tower, you might go up to a center, and vice versa.
So what was your position in there? Because you told me that you were even a trainer for the air traffic controller. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I did 6 years at Los Angeles Center, which is high altitude, and then I did 5 years at SoCal Approach, which at the time was the busiest air traffic facility in the world in terms of operations per day. They did about 7,000 aircraft per day, every 24-hour period. I did a lot of training. A lot of folks will train after they certify. It's part of the job description. And there's always a lot of new hires coming in due to the big fire that occurred during Reagan's presidency when there was the big air traffic control strike. And so because a lot of those controllers got fired back then, we have a mandatory age out at age 56, which is the mandatory retirement age. And so because of all the retirees that were occurring, there was a big hiring going on. And so I did a lot of training and trained a lot of folks during my 11 years there.
Yeah, a lot to get to with that, and it's just such a fascinating job, as you said there. And there is a age cutoff of when you can actually train to become an air traffic controller. Now, getting to the crash itself, we've listened to some of the tapes, and you can hear an air traffic controller asking the Black Hawk if they see the CRJ, that American Airlines flight, and they reply, visual separation. What does that tell you, and what have you gathered from the recordings so far?
Yeah, so the PAT was a helicopter, as you mentioned. They were on a training mission. A lot of these military pilots are relatively young, so they should be handled with extra caution. We do know that the PAT did report the American CRJs, American Eagle CRJ-7 in sight, but the PAT was 200 feet high along the Potomac River. I listened to the tapes, and what I heard was the controller noticed this about 21 seconds prior to the collision, asked Pat to confirm he had American in sight. He said, yes, we'll maintain visual separation, which is great. Now that's on the helicopter. However, what the controller did not mention was that they had converging courses, and what I think likely happened, and of course I'm speculating, I'm willing to be wrong here, but what I think likely happened was the helicopter pilot had a different aircraft in sight. It was later at night. The controller was working multiple positions at once, but over there at the Reagan Airport, there's multiple aircraft coming into land, and so you can easily look up, and all you do is see a bunch of lights. And so likely had the wrong aircraft in sight. The controller was silent for about 17 seconds leading up to the incident. There was no traffic reported to or called out to the American coming in, the CRJ-7. There was no sort of collision avoidance or anything of that nature in the 17 seconds. And then after the crash for 16 seconds, I heard silence until another pilot came on and said, Tower, did you see the crash?
And I want to ask more about all of this, but specifically about how it was revealed that there was one controller handling 2 jobs. There's been conflicting reports of whether that's normal. Have you ever been in that sort of situation where you've had to do 2 jobs of directing helicopters and other aircraft?
All the time. So staffing has been an issue for the entire 11 years that I worked there. Since I've left in 2020, it's definitely been an issue. I believe it's gotten worse from the folks that I still know that do it. because of it, we're forced to always work multiple positions combined. And there's been a lot of times when I was working there where it was very unsafe working multiple aircraft, multiple positions at once. And I think this was the case during this DC crash, unfortunately.
Now, NTSB board member J. Todd Inman said the aircraft communicate using different radio frequencies. We know that the recordings online of air traffic communication before the crash don't contain the helicopter's ultra-high frequency. Do you know what exactly that means and how that plays into this whole investigation that we now see because of this deadly collision?
Yeah, so when aircraft are flying, they're either flying using radios of UHF or VHF. As air traffic controllers, we use VHF. And so the helicopter pilot was probably monitoring a couple of different frequencies, but I can also say the air traffic controller was also listening and monitoring to a few different frequencies because they were working multiple positions at once. And so from a controller standpoint, when you're monitoring multiple frequencies, there's a lot of aircraft that are bleeding over and stepping on each other, and so you might miss readback because an aircraft is talking on one frequency and you might have an aircraft on another frequency, and so you can only listen to one at a time, but you might hear them both at the same time, which makes it hard to kind of work through your shift.
And I want to show viewers a video that I've flown into Reagan National Airport numerous times, and I want to show this video because I always like to take videos of flights landing, and it is just, once you reach the Potomac, you're there. You're getting your phone out ready to text, hey, yeah, I've landed. That's really how close you are to landing. And it's just so horrific, these circumstances that have come about. I know you've been in contact with some of the people you still keep in contact with at the FAA. What have they told you?
Well, first of all, my heart and condolences go out to all the 67 families involved. Yeah. From the folks that I have spoke to regarding this incident, what I do know is the staffing was definitely a big issue. It's continued to get worse progressively. I know the FAA currently is in a lawsuit right now due to declining about 1,000 well-qualified air traffic controllers due to the DEI stuff that's going on. I do know that. But I do know the main thing, I think the main cause of this issue really is the lack of staffing overall within the FAA, working multiple sectors and positions at once. And then obviously the equipment. The equipment with the FAA is very outdated. I mean, it was the case when I was there. We're working with 30, 40-year-old equipment. And then the last thing I'll say is this. I think that there's definitely a gap in terms of the quality of hires that have been brought onto the agency.
Yeah.
It was the case when I was there. I saw a lot of people getting signed off. Most controllers are great individuals, phenomenal at what they do. But I will confidently say that there are some controllers that got through the program because of staffing that should not have been signed off and are very, very unsafe working the system. And I think the taxpayers out here in America, the flying public should know that there's a small percentage of them out there that are controlling that should not be controlling airplanes. At the end of the day, you're an air traffic controller, not an air traffic monitor. Control the situation.
And I think that that's such a great point to hone in on, is that you're an air traffic controller, not a monitor. And regarding the DEI, we know that President Trump, he was slammed for mentioning that DEI could have been, not necessarily cause this, but this could have been a factor in how the hiring goes within the FAA. Of course, he offered his condolences as well. And as you and I both know, we offer our condolences to everyone on board. Just such a tragic situation. You mentioned how the equipment at the FAA is very outdated. What other changes would you like to see, or at least when you were at the FAA, did you think should be implemented, especially in order for something like this to never happen again?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, because the equipment is so old, there's a lot of pressure and responsibility on the controllers, and due to human error, right? There's just going to be errors in the system and all that sort of thing. But because we have such good technology with the computers and the flight systems within all the aircraft, I think eventually we would transition to a little bit less responsibility on the controllers and a little bit more responsibility on the technology that we have However, it's a tricky situation because the controllers are backed by a union and the labor laws and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know how that will play out, but I will say in a day where we have a lot of technology, AI and social media, the aircraft have a lot of really like inept technology in their cockpits. Let's rely a little bit more on that and leverage some of the technology that's currently evolving very, very quickly. Let's bring on Elon Musk to start implementing some cool technology in those cockpits.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what this investigation reveals once it's completed, what changes come about. We already know that there's been the Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said that they've restricted military helicopters except in the case of a medical emergency because of this crash as a result. So it'll be interesting to see what changes come about. Again, Rich Summers, the CEO of Summers Capital and former FAA controller for 11 years. Thank you so much again for your time.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
For all our viewers asking where One America News is heading in the future, we would like to introduce you to OAN Live. OAN Live is the best way to stay up to date on all of the hard-hitting, straight-shooting, national and international headlines. And the best part is, OAN Live is only $4.99 per month. All the credible, honest, unbiased reporting One America News offers at a fraction of the cost of cable. Just go to OANN.com to easily sign up for OAN Live and stay informed.